Incoming message.
Welcome to this explainer. You know, right now, the whole world is basically celebrating what looks like the biggest, most historic government UFO release ever. I mean, we've got bipartisan congressional coalitions, this brand new data release system called Pursue, and some incredibly high-profile Senate hearings. On the surface, it looks like the absolute, genuine transparency we've literally all been waiting for. But what if it isn't? What if the very machinery being cheered on by the public and honestly politicians alike is actually a trap? Today, we're putting on our investigative journalist hats to examine a pretty startling paradox. We're looking at the idea that this historic push for transparency might actually be the most sophisticated, meticulously designed cover-up operation ever conceived. Okay, let's dive into this. Because Dr. Stephen Greer is waving a massive red flag right now, calling the current transparency push a dead-end plot. And this, right here, completely contradicts the celebratory, victorious mood of the entire disclosure community. While everyone else is, popping champagne over new government files and Capitol Hill forums, Greer is arguing that this entire apparatus is a carefully controlled narrative. It's designed to give us the illusion of transparency while strictly concealing what actually matters. But before we just write this off as unwarranted cynicism, we really need to look at exactly who is making this claim.
Listen, Dr. Stephen Greer is not just some casual commentator jumping on a trend. The guy has a formidable 25-year record. Back in 1993, he was briefing the CIA director on this evidence. By 1997, he was briefing members of Congress. And in 2001, he spearheaded that massive National Press Club event, bringing forward 21 highly credentialed government, military, and intelligence witnesses. So why does this matter today? Well, because the witnesses in Greer's archive were describing private contractor structures, hidden funding, retrieval programs, and multiple non-human species decades before they became the official subjects of today's congressional inquiries. His hit rate on predicting the broad structure of this hidden world is just incredibly high. So when he warns us that we're walking into a trap, his track record demands that we actually listen.
And this brilliantly illustrates the exact tension at the heart of our investigation today. Let's contrast these two perspectives. First, you have the optimistic goals championed by the forum. They look around and see a bipartisan congressional coalition, the Harvard Science Advisory Council getting involved, and they genuinely believe true transparency is imminent. The machinery is working, right? But then you have Greer's view. He looks at that exact same machinery and sees managed transparency designed specifically to stall us. He argues the government is just curating data to release only safe narratives, creating a sophisticated dead-end plot. It is literally a battle between genuine optimism and deep-rooted structural skepticism. So, let's move into layer 2, the historical playbook. To really understand Greer's cynical warning here, we have to look backwards. Because if you want to know how a massive institution is going to act tomorrow, well, you have to look at the strategies it used yesterday. And the government has historically been incredibly effective at absorbing public pressure without giving up any real substance. Look at the timeline. Back in 1953, they formed the Robertson Panel, but its actual recommendation was just to debunk the phenomenon. Jump to 1969, the Condon Report concluded the topic simply wasn't even worth studying. Then in the 2010s, the ATIP program, the Pentagon's secret UFO study, generated these massive global headlines, but severely lacked any substantive public disclosure. And now we have the current Pursue releases. Greer's argument is that Pursue is just the newest version of this exact same institutional tactic. You create a formal structure, you make it look like a rigorous investigation to satisfy immediate demands, and you absorb all that public pressure, all while keeping the truly sensitive stuff firmly locked away. Which brings us to layer 3, curation versus real disclosure. Let's actually shift away from historical theory for a second and look strictly at the hard data of this current transparency push. 300. I want that number to really sink in for a moment. Under this massive, highly publicized, supposedly historic push for government transparency, exactly 300 files have been released to the public through the news system. Now, on its own, in a vacuum, a politician could point to that and say, hey, that's a great start, a real step forward. But as an investigator, that number is completely meaningless until you see the denominator. 3.8 million. Yeah, it turns out the government's definition of transparency leaves a few things out, to put it mildly. The absolute crucial point here is this glaring, almost unbelievable gap. 300 files released out of 3.8 million files that are actively being withheld. Releasing a fraction of a fraction of a percent is absolutely not transparency. That is curation. The information in those 300 released files might be completely real, sure, but it represents only the tiny, perfectly safe sliver of the picture that was specifically, deliberately designed for public consumption. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is exactly what is missing from those 300 released files. The Percy releases focus almost entirely on sightings, orbs, strange lights, erratic craft behaviors. It's a very safe, sterile narrative. It doesn't challenge the status quo too much. But compare that to whistleblower David Grush's explosive congressional testimony given under oath. I mean, he claims the government has recovered non-human craft, biological specimens, and possesses hidden reverse engineering data. Out of those 300 files released, not a single one corroborates Grush's most significant claims. The absence of this specific hard-hitting information is incredibly conspicuous. As an objective investigator looking at this data, you really have to ask, what criteria were used to select the 300 released files while deliberately hiding the rest? Someone, somewhere in that institutional apparatus made a choice. And by Steelman and Greer's position here, we realize that this selection process itself is an act of deliberate narrative management. It's like they're more than happy to answer the question of, hey, do strange lights exist in the sky? While completely stonewalling the question of, do we have their craft in biology? It's honestly a masterful way to steer the public conversation completely away from the most disruptive truths.
Okay, moving on to layer 4, the Frankenstein false flag.
This is where the rabbit hole goes even deeper, into perhaps the most disturbing layer of our investigation. If the government is carefully selecting what we see, we have to deeply question what they are actually trying to make us believe with these curated, sanitized releases. Greer introduces this concept he calls Frankensteins. These are human-made objects built with highly advanced reverse-engineered technology. The kicker? They're specifically designed to look and behave exactly like alien craft. Greer has argued since the late 90s that a covert program uses these man-made crafts to stage encounters, perfectly positioning the government to control the UFO narrative. By releasing curated footage right now to a public that is already primed to interpret everything as extraterrestrial, the strategic value for them is immense. And the terrifying conclusion to this theory? It could be setting the stage for a false flag event, where a staged, human-made alien threat is used to justify unprecedented global government power.
And that leads us right into layer 5, the two-tiered reality.
Now, you might be wondering, how in the world are so many highly educated, optimistic politicians and scientists actively celebrating this disclosure if this massive structural cover-up supposedly continues right under their noses? Well, the answer lies in how the government apparatus is actually built. On the surface, we have the visible layer. This is where you find your good faith congressional hearings, the Senate Forum, and the Harvard Science Advisory Council. These politicians might actually be acting with absolute genuine conviction, pushing hard for real transparency. But beneath that, completely insulated from view, is the hidden layer. This consists of private contractors, unconstitutional funding, and entirely unacknowledged retrieval programs. So the senators in the visible layer are pushing in good faith against a door, but they don't realize the people who built the door are on the other side, just feeding them exactly enough crumbs to keep the pressure manageable.
And listen, this isn't just some wild theory. This is exactly how whistleblower David Grush described the hidden layer operating. It functions entirely outside congressional visibility. It completely bypasses the normal regulated classification system. It relies heavily on private defense contractors, which, by the way, completely shields it from Public Freedom of Information Act or FOA requests. And it utilizes funding that entirely escapes constitutional oversight. Because this hidden layer is technically and legally separated from those visible congressional efforts, the releases are structurally designed so they can literally never touch the actual truth.
Which brings us to the final, lingering question of this entire explainer. Who decided what stays in the 3.8 million withheld files? Dr. Stephen Greer has spent 25 years in this space, and his warning is crystal clear. As an investigator, when you step back and look at the historical patterns of committees, the mathematically curated data, and the hidden institutional structures relying on private contractors, you really have to wonder, have the people controlling this narrative simply perfected the art of releasing just enough truth to make the rest of it invisible? Take a hard look at the data we've covered today, question the narrative being handed to you, and ask yourself, is this the real thing, or are we just walking into the ultimate transparency trap?
Come to me, chickens! Cock-a-doodle-doo!